President of the United States. Is it just me, or did it seem like growing up, you always had that person in class that wanted to be president? It's one of those things that somebody wanted to do. But if that person was to really want to grow up and be president, how could they truly be president? Well, it's really not as hard as you think. It's actually pretty easy. I mean, just look at Donald Trump. Okay, maybe that wasn't fair, but honestly, if he could be president, couldn't anybody? Look, outside of having money, outside of successfully crashing a few businesses, what is he really qualified for? So then it honestly got me to thinking, what are the qualifications to be president? And if he can do it, is it really that easy? So we actually have a problem here. It is entirely too easy to be president. And me personally thinking, it's something needs to change. After looking at the requirements, we have a problem because, one, the first legislation of the United States Constitution was in 1789. And Article 2 was written in 1787 that includes the requirements to be president. Now, if my math is right, it's 2018, that was 1787. You're talking about 200 plus years ago. Now, the requirements to be president are, you have to be 35 years of age, a natural born citizen, and that's pretty much it. So when you really think about it, I have to be 35 and a natural born citizen just to be president. And now you see why we're in the situation that we're in now. Let's go back to 1787 for a second. The reason that these are the requirements to be president is because during this time, life expectancy wasn't terrific. So they thought 35 years of age was a pretty solid maturity level of a person or the president. And the whole natural born citizen was to keep any non-American, in this case, Alexander Hamilton. Well, according to Miss Riley of the Detroit Press, who interviewed Mr. Sedler, a constitutional law professor, in 1987, the whole age and birth thing was only developed to, one, the maturity level, like I previously stated, and to keep Alexander Hamilton, who wasn't born in America, from being president. Now, that just doesn't sound like, hey, if you're 35 and you're a natural born citizen, you should be able to run the country. Don't you think you need a little bit more requirements than being 35 and being born in the United States of America to be the president of the United States? It's literally harder to get a job as a telecommunications person than it is to be president of the United States. That just doesn't even make sense. Now, because it's too easy to be president, and they only wanted to have basically two requirements to be president, we have Donald Trump as our president. Granted, he's not the only issue to the 35 years old and a natural born citizen problem. There are many others in history. Actually, it's a lot in history. I can go down the list, but that's not the point. That's just proving my case even further. He's just the most recent person of this issue. Now, I have a solution, And also, according to Myra Adams of the National Review, she kind of put my solutions to good use. Now, I can see if a person had the resume of, oh, they were vice president. Oh, they served a term in the Senate. They were governor. They were a U.S. representative. They held a cabinet position. If you've done all of that and you know how the system of the country works, or you know how politics work, and you have fully shown the capabilities of becoming the president of the United States and doing a wonderful job. Granted, the president of the United States is probably the toughest job in this country, but it's the highest position in this country for a reason. It's not supposed to be easy. But if you're telling me you've done that before you become president, I'm thinking that you have a pretty good shot at being president. Like, you would actually do a good job at being president. So 1787 is when it was put on paper. 1789 when the Constitution passed its first legislation. It's 2018, yet it is still easy to become president. I don't get how, after all of this time, you've never seen a problem with, oh, maybe we should make it a little more difficult to be president. Granted, there are steps that you have to take to actually be nominated for president. That's not even hard. But in the same sentence, these are just the requirements to be president. And nobody seems to think that's a problem. I don't know if it's just me or if that's outraging to anybody else, but you're basically giving our country in the hands of somebody that's 35. They haven't even lived half of their life. And oh, they were born in America, so that makes them fully qualified to be president. So one, I think it's entirely too easy to be president. Why would they even try to hold one person because he wasn't born here from becoming president? And we actually need to develop some solutions to make it a little more difficult, or at least put somebody more qualified to run the country in the highest position in the country. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So hopefully you can make some sense out of that.